girl. While at York Penn State, I decided I wanted to play soccer and also decided in the winter I wanted to wrestle. Well, that took time from my studies. Also, my inability to effectively manage my time had a large impact on my grades. You see, I did not study regularly. I waited till the last moment. I was one of those exam tomorrow, pulling all-nighter in the wee hours of the morning, and then pop the no-dose caffeine tablets because I didn't like coffee then. Consequently, my test scores suffered, and as many of you know, I'm not a large animal veterinarian. Now, maybe I just wasn't that smart, but not effectively managing my time influenced my future plans. I remember calling my dad and saying I'm changing my major. The lesson here is that we have a limited amount of time, so stick to the task. That was important in 1976, and it's just as important in 2023. Think about the words that we use to describe time. There's not enough time. There's not enough hours in a day. I'm running out of time. Man, time sure does fly. Let's take an unscientific poll. How many of you would love to have more time? Okay, there you go. Participate. Thank you. Okay, so yes, we would all love to have more time to do those things that we enjoy. We'd love to have more time to spend with those that we love. We would love to spend more time with God. We'd love to have more time to relax. But there are two realities when it comes to time. Number one, the time we have will be spent. You cannot save time. You will use all of your time. We all are gifted 24 hours a day. Nobody gets 24 hours and 10 minutes. Nobody gets 30 or 23 hours and 40 minutes. We all get the same amount of time. Number two, the time that we lose, it cannot be regained. The time that we lose cannot be regained. Listen, you can regain money. You can regain your possessions. You can even regain your reputation, but you cannot regain time that is spent. You can't get back time from last year. You can't get back time from last month. You can't get back time you spent yesterday. Time waits for no one. The truth is that there are many people that you and I know who have probably told us how they have regretted how they have spent some of their time. Have you heard, I wish I would have been home more when my kids were younger? Or how about I spent too much time at work and not enough time with my family? The truth is, your days are numbered, so number your days. There have been seasons in my life when I have neglected this truth that our time is truly limited. There have been times when I spent a lot of time watching sports on TV and not spending it with Jill, my wife. Now, she does like to watch golf, however. There have been times when I spent at work not spending it with my children. There's been time spent at my hobby, I love to golf, instead of spending it with God and or serving others. Maybe you have had similar things in your life where you have not been aware of where you were spending your time. So I want to remind you today, your days are numbered, so number your days. Last week, this is the second week in the Guardrails series. And today I just want to talk to us about building guardrails around our time. As Pastor said last week, guardrails are very important. Guardrails are put in place to prevent vehicles from going into a dangerous or sometimes even a deadly area. In this series, we are going to be talking about how guidelines applies to our lives. The truth is, if we were honest, we all probably have regrets relationally, morally, ethically, professional guardrails. Last week, Pastor set up this whole series and said that guardrails are installed when we ask this question. Anybody remember what the question was? What is the wise thing for me to do? And I love what he said. He said it's not necessarily about what is right or wrong. It's more about what is the wise thing for me to do. And he also said last week, it's also a personal thing. What might be wise for Doug might not be wise for you, and vice versa. We learned last week, in addition, that wisdom directs and wisdom protects. acting wisely keeps us from crashing. Pastor encouraged you and I to develop guardrails. So today we're going to look about developing guardrails around time, because your days are numbered, so number your days. The memory verse for this series is Proverbs 4:23, which is on the screen. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Okay, so today we're going to examine the truth in Psalm 90. The scripture will be up on the screen. However, Psalm 90 is where the reference is. Psalm is located in the center of the Bible. And for those Bible trivia folks, Psalm 117 is the exact center chapter of the Bible and is also the shortest chapter, and it only has 2 verses. You can look it up to see what those 2 verses are. It's pretty cool. Most of the Psalms were written by King David. However, this psalm is one of the older ones, and it is attributed to Moses. Moses learned the truth about placing guardrails around his time from experience. You can read all of that in Exodus 18, but I'm going to give you a brief synopsis. Moses was a leader of the Israelite children when they left the bondage of Egypt and were wandering in the wilderness. They kept bringing all of their problems to Moses to arbitrate. Verse 13 informs us that Moses was doing this from morning till evening. The all day, every day Moses listened to the problems of his people, then found a solution to their problems. In verse 17 through 19, we read that Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, offered some timely advice. He said, Moses, what you are doing is not good. You are going to wear yourself out. The work is too heavy. You can't do it alone. Basically, Jethro was saying, Moses, you're headed for a cliff. Moses listened to his father-in-law, and he placed some guardrails around his time. He selected capable men, trained them, and put them in charge of hundreds and hundreds of people so they could handle the simple problems, and if they had ones that were too difficult, they could bring them to Moses. Delegation is an awesome time management skill. So Moses wrote Psalm 90 for all of us and wanted us to know that your days are numbered, so number your days. When we place guardrails around our time, it will prevent us from going over the cliff. The first truth that we're going to see as we look at Psalms 90 is verses 1 through 6, is the recognition of our limited time. The theme of Psalms is all about the transient nature of our earthly life. The transient nature of our earthly life. Moses was pointing this out, that God is eternal, man is temporal. Verse 1, Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations. God is a place of rest. He's a place of refreshment. God is our home. God is a haven. He was that for the Israelite children when they were in bondage in Egypt, and he was that for them when they were wandering in the wilderness. God has always been there for his people. The point is that God has been constant through all the years. However, generation after generation after generation after generation has stood on the stage of history. But all of them are gone. The rich, the poor, the famous, the infamous, the good, and the bad. This truth is further developed in the next verse, verse 2. Before the mountains were born, or you gave birth to the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Think about 2 arrows going in completely opposite directions and going on and on and on and on. That is God. He is eternal. He always was, he always is, and he always will be. God is eternal, but we are temporal. There is brevity to our days, folks. We're gone tomorrow. Verse 3, you turn man back into dust and say, return, O children of men. In stark contrast to God, we are reminded of our frailty and our finiteness. These words echo the promise that God gave to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden after their first sin. Genesis 3:19 says, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. We are just dust in the winds of time. Our time is brief. It's but only a moment. James 4:14 confirms this. It says, you are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. While God is forever, we are not. Verse 4, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by. Time for God and man just isn't the same. In fact, there's just really no comparison. From God's perspective, 1,000 years is like 24 hours that quickly passes by. But then if you read further in verse 4, it says it's even less than that. No, it's actually like a watch in the night. A watch in the night is a simple, short 3-hour time frame. How do our lives look in context with 1,000 years? To God, like 3 hours. Then we have two illustrations that Moses provides that shows us and informs us that our days are limited. The first one in verse 5 says, you, God, have swept them away like a flood. They fell asleep. Each human being is a drop in the giant stream of time. Our days are numbered, and when we are gone, we sleep the sleep of death. He went on and gave a second illustration. In the morning, they are like grass which sprouts anew. In the morning, it flourishes and sprouts anew. Toward evening, it fades and withers away. Here we are simply compared to grass. It grows, we're vibrant, and then it fades and withers away, gone forever. I asked Jill, I said, I need an illustration for this sermon. I said, do you know of any plants that bloom one day and the next day or so they're gone? And she said, yeah. She says, we have some rain lilies. The rain lily is one of those. She says, it's beautiful, it blooms, but then in a couple days later, it withers away. You see, the rain lilies are limited, and our days are limited too. Verse 10, as for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due strength, 80 years. Moses is just stating here that the normal lifespan is 70 to 80 years. However, we don't want you to miss this point. The point is the emphasis is not on the length of the years, but the brevity of life. The brevity of life. Talk to someone who is in their 70s or 80s. They will tell you that life has gone by very quickly. Moses wrote in verse 10, yet their pride is but labor and sorrow, for soon it is gone and we fly away. Moses simply is telling us life is going to be difficult and tiring, and then it's over. Moses understood your days are numbered, so number your days. The second truth is the response to our limited time. The response to our limited time. It is good to stop, reflect, and recognize that our time is limited. Because when we recognize that our time is limited, it forces us to ask the question, to respond in a particular way. And Moses is going to help us with that as we place guardrails around our time. Verse 11, who understands the power of your anger and your fury, according to the fear that is due you? Now, this is an interesting verse. Most commentaries agree that this verse does not translate well from the Hebrew. English transitions significantly vary about what they say this means. Pastor and I were talking about this, and Pastor said, yes, some of the commentaries don't even explain what this verse means. However, he said that the Hebrew scholars seem to agree on the meaning of this verse. Simply, if we could see God as who he is, we would give him the reverence that he deserves. Moses had extensive experience with those who did not fear God when he was with the Israelite children in Egypt and when they were wandering in the wilderness. So after Moses recognized that our days are limited, he paused and reflected on that response. If we could see God as he is, would not the rational response be to spend our limited time giving God the honor and the glory that he deserves? When we think of fear of God, it's not an afraid thing. It's a sense of awe. I mean, he is the creator of the universe. He is ever present. He's all knowing. He's all powerful. He deserves our praise and our respect. It's maybe not a good analogy, but it's kind of like when you walk into when you're in a courtroom and the judge walks in, it's all rise, right? There's an honor and respect. And I think that's how we should be when we're fearing God, is just this honor. So we need to be careful about how we spend our limited time, the time that has been given to you. So the bottom line for Moses in this psalm is in verse 12. So it starts off with two words, so. That is there referring to because God is eternal and our days are brief and limited, so teach us to number our days. Moses asked God to teach us to number our days because we do not do this naturally. Moses asked God to teach him how to rethink what he was doing with his limited time. You know, most of us have a tendency to almost live or think or live like we're going to live forever. We spend our time as if we're always going to have our children. We spend our time as if we're always going to have our parents. We spend our time as if we're always going to have our friends. We spend our time as if it is really unlimited. Think about what you cram into your life, how you prioritize your schedule, and how you spend your time. We live our lives as if our days are not numbered, but even though they are numbered. 12c continues that 4-letter word is there because there is a reason to number our days. There is a reason to number our days. Verse 12 finishes that we may present to you a heart of wisdom. Moses wanted God to teach us to number our days. He knew that as a result, we would gain wisdom. Wisdom around what we should put into our lives, what we should take out of our lives, and how we should prioritize our time. If we do not learn to number our days, we will foolishly spend our time and our lives with no guardrails. We will end up having an avoidable crash that one day we will regret. When you think of all the time in the world, you will one day realize you do not have all the time in the world. And at that point, you will realize you can't get your time back. You will only be in your 20s once. You will only be in your 30s once. You will only be 39 for a couple years. The point is that once your time is spent, it is gone. Will you spend and invest the days that God has given you wisely? Because your days are numbered, so number your days. Because all of that is true, what should we do? Say we should create breathing room. When you create breathing room in your schedule, you are placing guardrails around your time. When you place guardrails around your time, it will keep you from crashing relationally, spiritually, and emotionally. Stephen Covey is the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read his book, 35, 40 years ago, and this one thing stuck with me. He said that we are a product of our choices. We are a product of our choices. You get to choose how you spend your time, or better said, invest your time. Take a typical 24 hours, and I would recommend that you break out what you did in 30-minute increments. I have done this, and it can be very, very eye-opening. Now, I make the analogy to a financial budget, okay? Jill and I, we track receipts like crazy. If I come back from golf and I don't have a receipt, I'm in trouble. It's like, okay, where's your receipt? And the point there is we need to know where our money is going, right? So at the end of the month, we gather receipts, we put it in a category, we know how much we spent, we know how that compares to last month, and we know how that compares to last year. So if you want to manage your money wisely, you need to know where it's going. Well, it's the same thing with your time. If you don't know where your time is going, you can't make wise choices about how you're going to change where you spend your time. Does anybody still have the iPhone screen time tracker live on their phones? I don't know. Anybody see that? My goodness. When I saw that, it was like, whoa. So test that out someday. Turn that tracker on. If you want to see how much time you're spending on your phone, it will be enlightening. Okay, all of you have a card like this that I think was handed out today. And this is just going to help you think about, Pastor called it doing some math. We're going to do some addition, we're going to do some subtraction, and we're going to do some less than, and we're going to do some more than. Now, this is homework that you can do on your own, or maybe this is one you can do with your spouse, or one you can do as a family. But first, what is something that you need to add to your schedule that is not there today? Something you need to add to your schedule that is not there today. Maybe you need to exercise. Maybe you need to read. Maybe you need more me time. What is it that you need to add that is not there today? Second, what is something that you need to subtract from your schedule that is there today? Something you need to subtract that is there today. Maybe you need to subtract an unhealthy relationship. Maybe a time-consuming bad habit. Third, what is something you need to do less of that you are doing today? Maybe you need to work less overtime, maybe less television. Do you know the average adult watches 3 hours of TV every day? Maybe it's less hobby time. Maybe it's less time on social media. You don't need to get rid of it completely. It's just what would benefit you if you did less. And then finally, what is something you need to do more of that you are already doing today? Maybe you need to spend more time with God, maybe more time serving, maybe more time with your family. Maybe you want to spend time mentoring. Maybe you want to do some self-help stuff and read and improve your education. Some of us may need to write the word home on our calendars. Some of us just may need to write the word God on our calendar. Now, not that you aren't doing these things already, but that you would benefit by doing them a little more. Ask God to teach you to number your days so that you will gain a heart of wisdom. You see, your days are numbered, so number your days. If you are here and you have committed your life to following Jesus, I hope you see the importance of evaluating your life and how you spend your time and your Christian walk. As a committed follower, you should know that God has something that he wants to do through you. If you do not build guardrails around your own time, it will be easy to miss what God wants you to do. Don't let other people determine your schedule or other things. Often these things will destroy or break down your guardrails. Setting boundaries and being able to say no is a great time management skill. God has something for your family. God has something for your kids. God has something for your marriage. God has something for you in your life. Ephesians 5:15-16. It says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity. So number your days, and you will gain a heart of wisdom. Your days are numbered, so number your days. Create breathing room, and you will be glad that you did. On the dairy farm, there was a small graveyard, and it was beside the pasture at my grandfather's farm. And for some unknown reason, I decided to go walk through that graveyard. Anyway, on one of the tombstones, it had an 18-wheeler etched in the front of it. I thought that was the coolest thing. So I remember talking to my high school friends. I said, next time you're over, we got to go check out the tombstone. Now, we have a lot of graveyards around Bellwood, and I know many people walk the graveyards. Now, some of you may notice the neat designs on the tombstones. Others of you may be looking at the dates. When were they born? When did they pass away? And you'll notice that some people were rather young. Others of you may look at the epitaphs, which is that little short description that briefly describes the individual that has deceased. You may see epitaphs like loving husband, caring mother, devoted friend, follower of Jesus. Martin Luther King, his was free at last. Thank God I'm free at last. Mel Blanc, anybody remember that name sound familiar? The American voice actor, his was, that's all, folks. And one that made me smile was, all of your life, you made us laugh, we will not weep now. So the point here is that when your earthly life is over, it's over. It's not going to matter what your socioeconomic status is. It's not going to matter what position you have in the company. It's not going to matter if you're a Penn Stater or travel the world. Only the important things are going to matter. Use your time wisely. Your days are numbered, so number your days. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for this time that we can come together and to honor and worship you.